So kicking off the second half of the day is Tammy. This is that schedule swap that we talked about where Dora's going to go tomorrow and Tammy is going to come in today. Tammy is working at SpeedCurve, and Tammy is one of my absolute favorite people in the performance community. Just very genuine, very kind, very intelligent. Like, I could rave about her actually. Like, I was going to say for like gush, but we have to move on eventually. Plus, it's going to get really awkward for her. But yeah, so Tammy.
Thanks, Tim. Thank you very much. This is, I think I'm just going to echo what everyone else has said. It's just so exciting to be in a room full of actual people again and eating delicious conference food together and just chatting and doing all those fun conference things. The fun conference thing that I had forgotten about, that I don't miss at all, is all the crazy tech things where I realize I've got a 5-year-old laptop and none of the dongles match. So. But that's fine. So I'm here to talk about real-world performance budgets. And if you don't know what I mean by performance budgets, that's okay. You'll learn everything shortly. This is me. I don't know why I put my picture on this slide. This is what I look like. I guess it's, if anybody looks at these slides, online later on, they can have a fun visual reference. You can find me if you have any questions online at Twitter at Tam Everts. You can also find me here. This is where I live. It's this little ski town in Nelson, British Columbia. It's okay if you don't know where it is. Nobody does. But that's my house. It's right there. It's very far away. And so when I'm not doing things in the mountains in my little mountain town, I work on performance things. And what that means in my kind of like slice of this world is user experience. So I've been doing performance things, as we say, for about 10 or 12 years now. It's probably more than that. I think I've been saying 10 or 12 years now for a while. But my background is actually in user experience and usability studies. So when I come to performance, I come with I care about what users care about because I am a user. And so it's really easy for me to put myself in their shoes. And so the work that I've done focuses on measuring performance and understanding performance and how it affects users in all the kind of the ways that make them feel good and make them happy, but then also, as I wrote about in my book, Time is Money, in the ways that help you as a business hopefully make some money or save some money. I also help curate a set of benchmarks. So if you're interested in things like industry benchmarking and you work in industries like travel or retail or tech, you can actually go to speedcurve.com/benchmarks and kind of get it. It's a daily test that we do, a synthetic test run, where we just measure the performance of leading websites in a bunch of these different sectors. And we show you how they perform in terms of start render and LCP and fun metrics like that. So it's just kind of a fun resource, and I'm going to be kind of pointing back to it later on in this talk to kind of talk about how it can actually be helpful for you in creating performance budgets. And a big part of my job is really just talking to a lot of people. So people at conferences, SpeedCurve customers. I talk to hundreds and hundreds of people every year. And it kind of boils down to the same couple of questions that people ask me, which is, how fast should my site be? How fast should my pages be to keep my visitors happy and make money and all those other fun things? And how can I make sure that my pages stay fast? And that's really kind of what performance from a UX perspective really boils down to, two very simple questions. They don't have simple answers, unfortunately. I wish they did. It would definitely make my life a lot easier, my days a lot shorter. Before we get into talking about performance budgets, I want to tell you a scary story. It's pretty scary, though. It's almost Halloween, though, so maybe you've been prepping by watching some scary movies and things like that. It's a story about regression. So this is a story that had a really big impact on me when I was first starting out in performance back in 2010. This was a couple of talks that were presented at the Velocity conference in Santa Clara. And the first one was someone from Shopzilla, which has now been acquired by Connexity, and I don't know how it existed within that organism, but they did originally a case study where they presented in 2009 that they had done all these great optimizations, and they had improved their load time and kind of cut it down to 1.2 seconds, which is amazing. And they saw this increase in their conversion rate of up to 12%, which was like a really inspiring case study. And it definitely got me fired up. What I was really interested in, though, even more so, was 2 years later when they came back to Velocity in 2011, and they shared another story, and it was the same team, about how they kind of dropped the ball in 2010. They got busy, as we all do, feature development. Feature development often takes precedence over maintaining the features that you already have. And they kind of thought, performance is something we could sort of catch up on later on. We'll fix some things and do some sprints and that sort of thing. And it really actually hurt the user experience, but it also hurt their business metrics. And they got feedback from people saying things like, I will not come back to this site again. And you know that if somebody is actually going to the trouble of writing to you and telling you that your site is slow, there are probably 100 other people who are just thinking it, maybe 1,000, maybe thousands, we don't know. It takes a lot to make somebody go to the trouble of writing a letter to customer support. So they refocused on performance, and the presentation they did at Velocity in 2011 was how it was kind of early days, but they were already seeing conversions start to creep back up, page views start to creep back up, so an improvement in their other metrics. So this is a really good story. Now, their issues were, as we talked about, is constant feature development, having really poorly implemented third parties, kind of all the usual suspects, things like that. But really the big problem was that they had no way to track regressions. And talking about regressions feels really, really, really unsexy. It's not as fun as building something. It's not as fun as doing something shiny and new. But I have a quick question, and I'm going to try to make out the hands in the crowd. How many folks in this crowd are currently building things from absolute scratch, brand new right now? And okay. And how many people are responsible for maintaining something that's been around for a while? So I think the important thing so a lot of people, I don't know if anybody looked around, most people raise their hand for maintaining. I think it's an important thing to do is to reframe your thinking about fighting regression and think, fighting regressions is cool. I'm a superhero because I'm basically stopping all the bad guys from getting in. So if only back in those days, those early days when Shopzilla was dealing with these very common struggles, if only the idea of performance budgets had existed back then, it would have really saved a lot of people's bacons. So today, what I want to talk about is what is a performance budget? Which metrics should you focus on? What should your thresholds be? You can't have a budget if you don't have a threshold. Otherwise, you're just tracking a bunch of numbers and looking at them going, and then walking away. And then how do you actually manage your budgets? What are some practical things you can do to actually just maintain your budgets? And I really want to impart upon you the fact that even though I'm not a developer, I'm very developer adjacent. I get that you're trying to do a million trillion different things and you're pulled in a lot of different directions. And so there's kind of, the ideal performance budget situation where you're tracking a ton of different things and you're getting alerts on everything and you've always got time to spend on fixing every little thing that comes your way. But what we're really looking about is, this is another TLA for Nick's collection, MVB, minimum viable budgets. So budgets for the real world. How can you actually take performance budgeting away and just hit the ground running with something real and actionable and manageable that you can actually do in your day-to-day life if you are one of those people who doesn't have the luxury of being able to focus on performance 100% of the time? So what is a performance budget? Well, it's really just a threshold that you create. It's a budget. And I don't lay any claim to coining the term performance budget. I think it was actually Steve Souders originally coined it, and then Tim really did a great job of kind of running with it and popularizing it, and was the one who actually made me aware of it as a term back in 2013, something like that. So they've been around for almost 10 years, or over 10 years. And so it's really just anything that you can measure that has a numeric value that you can put on it on your site, you can ostensibly create a budget for it. And so they can be milestone timings like start render or largest contentful paint. They can be quantity-based metrics like page size or image weight, or they can be score-based metrics like your Lighthouse scores or CLS. And a performance budget should show you like obviously what your budget is, like what your threshold is, what metric you're tracking, when you go out of bounds, when you get back within bounds, and how long you stayed out of bounds at a kind of a basic level. And so a good performance budget looks kind of like this, and I hope everyone can see this. It's a time series that's showing just about a week's worth of data, and what you can see is the red line is the budget, so it's about just over 1 second, 1.1 second, and you can see when the budget was violated on August 12th, and you can see when the budget was fixed, or for whatever magical reason, it came down within threshold. And so your performance budget should be able to show you this. How you measure them is you can actually create performance budgets in real user monitoring tools or synthetic tools. And I think there's been a fair bit of talk, and maybe everyone's already familiar with what both these sets of tools are, but I'll put these up because inevitably there are a few people who are kind of like, what is RUM? What's synthetic? They're not. I think for a long time there was a belief that synthetic was kind of maybe sort of basic or the least easy, and RUM was kind of something you did as a kind of a nice to have, or maybe that it was better. And there's really there's no better. They're very, very complementary. They do very different things. So with performance, or with RUM, you have like your real network browser conditions. You do have to install the snippet on your pages. You can only measure your own site, but you can measure all the visits to your site across a vast geographic spread, et cetera. Where synthetic is, as its name kind of implies, you're kind of doing lab testing. Your specific URLs, and you're really defining what your test scenario is in terms of browser and region and things like that. So, but the nice thing about synthetic is that it lets you do really fun things like get film strips and videos and kind of visuals, and also diagnostics. So Lighthouse is a synthetic tool. Other synthetic testing tools will kind of give you a set of diagnostics so that you can actually drill down and see what are the things that are wrong on the page and what you can do to fix them. And then there are a lot of different tools out there that do RUM in synthetic. The tools that I'm most familiar with that do performance budgets as part of the RUM in synthetic are these tools. Some of them are open source, some of them are paid tools. SpeedCurve, we're up there, we do RUM in synthetic, but there are others as well. So if you're using any of these tools already, or you're thinking about using any of these tools, I would definitely encourage you to look and see what their performance budget capability is, because I think if I had to like TLDR this whole talk, it's if you're not using performance budgets already, you absolutely must, and find the quickest way to kind of get started with that in your org. All right, so I have like a huge debt of gratitude to Nick Jansma, because he did such a great talk and kind of already established some of the terms that I'm going to be talking about, like correlation charts and histograms. So thank you, Nick, for doing that. And when I talk about metrics to focus on, kind of like Nick, we all want the unicorn. There is no unicorn. I wish there were a unicorn. I want to believe. And I think most of us kind of do, except maybe Andy, up here in the front row. And kind of showing great minds think alike. This is my version of this slide that Nick did, which is pretty funny, except he said BBQ and I'm less polite. So really what we're looking at is we don't get a unicorn, we get this mess. And if you're new to performance, or even if you're not new to performance and you've been using tools for a while, I sit around tables with people who've been doing performance things for 10, 20 years, and we still sometimes just walk away more confused than we started. But everybody's trying to figure this out, and everybody, I think we're all kind of cynical optimists at this point, except maybe Andy, who's just maybe a cynical cynic. But we want to believe that there's this next metric, this shiny new metric that comes along, might be the one. It's going to be our holy grail of metrics. But we've kind of ridden around this carousel a few times and sort of realized, like, okay, what are the holes? And so we kind of start off a little bit jaded. Just at SpeedCurve, for example, you can put performance budgets on more than 50 synthetic metrics. And actually, if you're tracking individual third parties, 25 additional metrics per third party, 30 plus run metrics, and then however many custom metrics you feel like throwing timers on. So it's a lot. And again, I want to kind of get back to like the purpose of this talk is to talk about what's your minimum viable budget. And if you're overwhelmed by all the different choices that are available to you, I always come back to like, take a deep breath, think about the user. Think about what the user's experience is. And again, the focus of this talk is going to be, if you're getting started with performance, or even if you're not tracking user experience, you should be. And if you're just getting started, measuring user experience and setting performance budgets on user-oriented metrics is probably the easiest way to get buy-in from other people in your org, because people don't understand time to first byte and CLS and all those other metrics. They do understand how users engage with a page and what the page actually looks like. So really, really visual metrics. The other litmus tests are just asking these questions from a visitor's perspective. Is the page loading? Can I use it? How does it feel? And so if you can kind of apply these litmus tests to any metrics that you're thinking about for your users, it's a really good place to start from. And so the ideal UX metric, from my perspective, has to fulfill, and when I say ideal, I mean like the perfect UX metric. Should track the most important content on the page from a visitor's perspective. Should be accessible right out of the box. It should be like already baked into your tools. It'd be great. You don't have to do any extra configuring or fiddling. It should be available ideally in synthetic and RUM, so that you can get alerted on RUM and then drill down to your synthetic and kind of do any diagnostic bits that you need to do there. It should be correlatable to your users, to your user metrics like bounce rate or page views or time on site, or to your business metrics like conversions and cart size. And it should ideally have as broad browser support as possible. That's the perfect metric. It should feel like this. It should be like, okay, great, I get it, it's easy, it's friendly, I understand it, but we all know, and you're quickly learning today, it's really kind of like this under the surface, and I don't pretend to claim to understand a lot of the dark arts that go into coming up with really, really nuanced metrics, but I do have a huge appreciation for the complexity. So let's start with, is the page loading? So before I get into this next bit, where we're going to be kind of doing a bit of an audit of some metrics, similar to what Nick did earlier, I really want you to take away from this, not that these are the metrics you should be focusing on, but that this process of auditing these metrics is a process. So I really want you to take away this process and these principles, not the metrics themselves. And the auditing process should be, hopefully, pretty straightforward. So is the page loading? Well, here's a chestnut. Back-end time. It's been around forever. I like it because it's measurable in synthetic and RUM. It's built right into pretty much every browser supports it. And does it correlate to anything meaningful in the browser? I don't know if you can see this. No, not really. But you can at least, you can see it in a waterfall, and you at least know that the page is responding. These are kind of those original criteria. When I kind of did a vague checklist as a light yes, it can be correlated to UX and business metrics. If in extreme cases it can be, because obviously a really poor back-end time is going to push out all your other metrics, and if your page has a back-end time of like 15 seconds, probably that's going to hurt your other metrics. So it's kind of a soft yes on that one. So start render is where things get a little bit more juicy. Nobody talks about start render anymore. People kind of wonder, like, it's been around so long, it's so old, maybe it's not relevant anymore, because we know that old things are bad. Sometimes old things are good. They're still here because they've stood the test of time. What I like about start render is it is measurable in synthetic and RUM. It's supported across browsers. And it typically does actually tell you when something shows up in the browser. Here you can see another film strip view in synthetic. You can see start render at 0.3 seconds, and you can see that, yes, in fact, you can visually validate this, which I encourage you to do with any of the metrics that you're tracking, is do some sort of visual validation first. And it's like, yep, great. There you go, start render. Good metric. The other reason I like it is because I've participated, read, reviewed countless case studies. A few years ago, did a really interesting big data sort of experiment with Google, and I worked with Pat Meenan on that, where we were like, actually, yeah, start render is still pretty important. Like across large data sets, on individual sites, it usually does correlate to really important user experience and business metrics. So I like it. I would, maybe it doesn't work for your site, it might not, I don't know, but I would definitely encourage you to run it through this validation process. Yeah, so there we go. So that was, yeah, conversion rate, and as before, bounce rate. So look at that, look at all those boxes checked, mostly. Tracks the most important content? Maybe not the most important content, but it does give users a sense that something's happening on the page, and that's really important. So can I use the page? Okay, well, can I use the page is a really important question to ask. A few years ago, I did a study that involved a lot of real users in a lab setting, and we asked them when they felt they could start interacting with the page. And just over half of them felt that they didn't want to interact with the page, it shouldn't be touched, until most or all of the images had rendered. For them, that was a signifier that, like, oh, okay, this page is safe to use. And so since then, it's been really heartening to see how many of the different browsers and tool providers have been really trying to wrangle, like, oh, what's the best way to measure the most meaningful content, that's visual content that's landed on the page. So LCP, as Nick talked about, is kind of the current metric that a lot of people are focused on. And it's a source of, I wouldn't even say cautious optimism. It's a fair amount of optimism. As you can see in this film strip, it's measuring something real in the browser in this particular instance, on this particular page. However, Rick Viscomi recently, I think it was maybe just yesterday or the day before, tweeted this out, that about 39% of pages are not actually making their LCP element discoverable. So it's interesting, right, to step back from this conversation about like what metrics work and why don't they work and is the metric broken? And it's like, is the metric broken, or is it just that we have the browser vendors and people like creating these metrics, trying to create one-size-fits-all metrics, when in fact the real issue is just maybe the pages are broken, and what can we do about that? And and as you can kind of see, like there's not really a one-size-fits-all way to measure all of these things. And I think we owe kind of a huge debt of gratitude to the browser vendors because without them, actually our pages would take like 5 minutes to load. So they're doing a lot of work already behind the scenes to make sure that that things are as fast as they actually are. So things that we've learned are LCP can be really tricky on mobile. You get a pop-up, boom, that's your LCP event. Is that really the thing that you want to track? Maybe not. Is it to do with the metric itself, or is it to do with how the page is built? So I recommend that you check out this post. I'll actually have a little glossary of, an index at the end of my slides that links out to all of these. Basically, Andy, my coworker at SpeedCurve, did a really great blog post just about element timing and kind of how it mitigates some of the issues with LCP. And one of the things that he found was that LCP can really vary for first view versus repeat visitors. And it can also vary by viewport size. So LCP, again, when I looked at LCP across 3 different sites, not unlike what Nick did, what I found was that often it does correlate to bounce rate and probably to other metrics as well. So it's definitely something that is worth kind of keeping in your toolbox. So there, yeah, we checked off a lot of boxes. Has broad browser support? Well, as we know from this morning's talks, no, unfortunately. It's for Chrome-based browsers. And I like this. I just kind of threw this in here because Nicholas Huazi pointed out that actually just if you're not sure about LCP being the right thing to track, or you want to do more to kind of capture things outside LCP to keep track of your important visual content, just having a budget for image weight is a great way of noticing, like, oh my goodness, this image is, the image weight on my page is suddenly huge, and that's a signifier that something's wrong. So how the page feels is really important, especially on mobile. And when CLS was first announced, I guess a couple of years ago, it's a great feeling metric to have, or it's nice to know that this type of experience is being measured, because previously nobody had tried to actually put a number or to quantify page jank. That feeling that things are moving around on the page and you don't know where your finger is going to land, and it's kind of like hitting a roulette wheel. Like, okay, I'm going to put my finger down now, and hopefully and then you're on the wrong page if you're on your phone. So it's really great to know that kind of metric is being captured. This is kind of how you can visualize CLS in synthetic tools. And what we're showing you here is just a couple of the layout shifts that have happened. So you can see kind of like right to left on the top is the layout shift as these items move around, and the shifted elements are highlighted and the new elements are highlighted. And then this is the next significant layout shift that happens. And so a really long set of these visuals, if there's a lot of CLS, a lot of layout shifts on the page, can be quite long and can really actually illustrate for you how janky your page feels. However, as for its correlation to business, looking at different data sets, sometimes not. Sometimes the CLS gets better, business metrics get worse. User metrics get worse. So it's a little bit, I would just do one of these and leave you to kind of explore this on your own. So again, here's our checklist. Does it track the most important content? Kind of. Is it accessible out of the box? I kind of like did a light check mark on this, because while it's available in the tools, I do feel like it takes a lot of understanding and visuals and things like that to really understand what it means. And that's kind of just the hazard of score-based metrics anyways. So just something to kind of think about. And is it available in synthetic and RUM? Yes, yay. But the other things is not ticking off those boxes. First input delay. I kind of feel like we've been picking on first input delays. I'm just gonna go past this set of slides, because it was a good start. We tried to care about first input delay because we liked the fact that it was measuring interactivity, like the fact that somebody is trying again to quantify, like how does that page, how quickly does the page respond, because that matters. You're more likely to navigate away from a page that doesn't give you kind of instantaneous response. Maybe not on that first slow response, but over time. It's very much a cumulative kind of experience and experiential problem. So I want to talk about long tasks a little bit, because we don't really talk about long tasks a lot in our world, at least like on stages. And so long tasks is just any JavaScript function that takes more than 50 milliseconds to execute. They don't always block their page rendering, but they can cause jank. And the nice thing about long tasks is you can measure them in synthetic and RUM. This is kind of what a series of long tasks look like. You can see the long tasks are called out in red, and you can see that these are all third parties. And so I would really strongly encourage you to track long tasks, especially if you have a lot of third parties on your page, because it's probably one way that you can get a sense of like what your third parties are doing on your page and have visibility if there are any sudden changes. We can see that long tasks more often than bid anyways correlate to conversions. And we also see that long tasks, as I said, can reveal issues with third parties. So I don't know how well you can make this out in the back, but the total size is the blue line. It holds steady. The green line is total requests, also holds steady. It doesn't really change. But look at how variable the long task time is. And that's actually measuring in the real world how well that JavaScript is being executed over time. And so this is why if you're just tracking the size of your third parties, you're really kind of maybe missing out on some important stuff. Interaction next paint. Again, I'm going to echo what Nick said. We are not tracking it yet, and there's not enough data yet to kind of show any kind of correlation. Element timing. I referred to this earlier. If you want to learn more about element timing, I definitely recommend that you find Andy Davies, this man in the front row. He'll be doing a talk tomorrow, and this is a sort of something that he's been championing internally at SpeedCurve and then out externally into the world as well. And in kind of long story short, what element timing lets you measure is on the same page, rather than focus on a single visual, you can actually just focus on the elements that you really want to focus on. So it's highly customizable. So I kind of made this little chart for myself because I'd never done this before, and it sort of struck me as something that I maybe should have done, is to just look at a whole bunch of metrics with these criteria and just sort of see how they score. Well, there's a better way. If you're taking photos, this is the better one. Here we go. So what I did was hopefully you can make out the yellow. I kind of highlighted the ones that seemed like they actually had, they checked off the most boxes for me. And again, not saying that that you should take these metrics as the metrics that you should use for your site. I'm saying create a chart that's like this. Do the validation that I've sort of illustrated with synthetic and RUM, and make your own chart and kind of figure out which are the metrics that work for you. I'm old enough that this used to be something we said all the time on like chats and stuff like that. Your mileage may vary, and your mileage will vary, actually. So now let's kind of get into the next question of what should your budget thresholds be? And I think a really important thing, and I was very guilty of this up until a couple of years ago when I was at, I believe it was a perf.now conference, and Harry Roberts, who will be doing a talk tomorrow, talked about how he does performance budgets. And it kind of just blew my mind, opened my eyes, and realized that I've been giving people bad information about how to do performance budgets. I have felt up until then that performance budgets were goals, and if you weren't meeting your budget, that you were kind of failing. And what I took away from Harry's talk was that a performance budget is really, it's a way to just know when things are going wrong. So your performance budgets are not the same as your performance goals. Your goals are aspirational, it's great. It's good to have things to aspire to, but your budgets are pragmatic. So you just want to keep from getting worse. You want to fight regression. So to create budgets to fight regression, what you want to do is look at your charts, look at your data for the last, let's say, 2 to 4 weeks. Find the worst number, not the best number, in your charts, and make that number your performance budget. So after you've made a budget, you can see it there. It shows up at that line. Ideally, you're just always underneath it. And if you exceed it, it's really, really obvious when you've exceeded it. The problem with making your goals into your performance budgets is that if you start out in the red, you're just always going to stay in the red, and that line becomes just meaningless and useless. Just practically, you're not going to be able to set up alerting or anything like that if you're always outside of bounds. And then as you fix things, as you get better, you revisit your budgets, and you should be doing this regularly. And I kind of say as a best practice, if 2 to 4 weeks, but this is going to kind of depend on your own time, that sort of thing. I will say that performance budgets are not something that need to be onerous. And if you set them up kind of minimally to begin with, checking in on them and doing a quick little, changing a number and walking away is really just a matter of a couple of minutes. Just something that you kind of like throw in your calendar and do. And then when you've done that, you can set some long-term goals for yourself. So I think it is really important to have things to aspire to, because you can't just say like, you set a performance budget for yourself of 4 seconds for largest contentful paint, and you stay within that. It's like, fine, we're great. Well, no, obviously you do need to improve. And how you can go about finding those numbers to be aspirational is through, for example, the thresholds that Google has set for Core Web Vitals. These are a good thing to aspire to. You can look at your competitors. So again, go back to a benchmarking dashboard. You can also use the HTTP archive and other tools like that. So just any public repository of data, and you can create your own benchmarking dashboard and see where you stand relative to your competitors or relative to the kind of best in breed in your industry. You can read other case studies. So WPOstats.com is a site you can go to, or you can upload your own case studies. And it's kind of organized by the metric that it affects and so on. But it's a great way to just kind of get a sense of what people in other industries are doing and also how they're doing it. You can also look at having as your goal, what is the best number for me to achieve in terms of like key metrics for improving business metrics. So if you have a histogram, and again, thank you so much, Nick, for explaining what a histogram is already, so I don't have to. And you see this correlation chart where your bounce rate is almost 80%, kind of at the 2-second mark, but at the 0.4 second mark, you are down to just under 41%. You can maybe try to like slide more of your people over to kind of 0.5 seconds to start render. And again, it's a correlation chart, it's not a causation chart, but you can kind of logic this a little bit to realize that if you get more people into those faster cohorts, it's probably going to improve bounce rate, for example. And again, I kind of made this cheat sheet, again, not budgets, goals. This is just a bit of a cheat sheet for numbers that are based on kind of industry standards, best practices that I've sort of collected over the years. Yours might be a little bit different. So then how do you manage your budgets? How do you stay on top of them kind of on a day-to-day basis? So one question that I hear a lot is, should I set up budgets on synthetic, RUM, both? What do I do? So there's no one answer to this. It kind of depends on A, the tools that you have available to you, and B, how you're going to use the tools. So scenario one is you can, if it's a metric like start render that you can track side by side in synthetic and RUM in the same tool, you can set a budget in RUM and then you can drill down into all the really great diagnostic stuff that you find in synthetic. Side by side. So this is an example where you can see that the yellow line is RUM, the blue line is synthetic, we're tracking start render, and the performance budget is set on RUM. So the performance budget for RUM is 2 seconds, and you can see when it's getting really close to 2 seconds right up there. So and then if you were to experience an issue or see that you're out of bounds on RUM, then you could drop down to that synthetic line, click on the data point in the line, and drill down into your synthetic test result. There's a little bit more to it than that. That's a little bit hand wavy, but it's kind of in broad brush strokes, kind of one way you can do it. Scenario, well, that's not scenario one, that's scenario two. Okay, so another scenario is that you can create your budgets in synthetic and then integrate them with your CI/CD process. So by that I mean you can create budgets and actually have those budgets in play when you're doing deploys in your test environment, your dev environment, on your staging server, and you can get alerts on budget violations before anything even goes to production. So an alert would kind of look like this. So it's basically a way of kind of getting the insights when you probably really want them before anything goes live. Should I create performance budgets for every metric I track? Oh, I really hope not. There's such thing as too much information. You don't need to set up budgets for everything. If you do, it just kind of ends up looking like this, where it's like you've got this big dashboard, and maybe you're a person who likes big dashboards and lots of lights, but I don't. And probably from a UX perspective, if you're thinking about your other stakeholders in your organization as also being users, they don't want to see this either. And you're just going to end up being like this guy if you get all those alerts constantly. Do you need performance budgets for all your pages? No. I mean, again, this is minimum viable budgets. This is based on another project, a research project that I participated in several years ago, where we actually looked at conversion impact scoring and activity impact scoring, where what we were really trying to investigate was what is the impact of making performance improvements on specific pages, because all the pages aren't equal, and users react differently to different pages, depending on where they are in your funnel. And so what we found was that broadly, product and category pages, or the equivalent if it's a media site or an informational site, would be an article page or a category page, a department page, and then the home page, kind of distantly, and then kind of cart, search, all those types of pages, kind of in the bottom two of these 5. So if you had to start anywhere, do the equivalent of product and category for your site. And who should be responsible for managing budgets? It's easy to feel like it should be you, because you're the person who probably holds the keys to all the cool tools. And you're the person probably who starts with the budgets and kind of acts as a steward. But really, everyone who touches the page should understand the impact of the performance on that page, and they should understand what the performance budget is, why the performance budget exists, and why it matters when they violate it. And I really like, I need to hurry up. I really like this case study by Dan Chilton when he was at Vox Media, where they had a performance team, and they were really trying to get buy-in from stakeholders, non-technical stakeholders around the organization. And they did not want to be performance cops. They just didn't want to be holding all the power, because people just stop caring if they're not invested, and you really want people to care. So their goals were to just set up best practices, make recommendations, get people familiar with using the tools themselves. And again, this is where the minimum viable budgets come into play. If you've got a CEO or your chief marketing officer, maybe they only care about one metric on one specific page, and all you give them is a chart for that metric and that page, but they have complete buy-in into it, and that kind of becomes their North Star. That's much more important than loading them up with 50 metrics that they're not going to care about. So before I sign off, just a few things I want to, if you take nothing else away from this talk, I want you to remember these things. It's really important to start small. If you're already deep in the performance budget trenches, this is maybe not aimed at you, because you might already have a lot of budgets and you're fully wired up and ready to go. But maybe think about this in terms of if you want to create dashboards or reports for other people outside your immediate org. Starting small with just a single metric is really helpful. Always visually validate your metrics when possible in terms of user experience metrics, and then validate them some more from a UX and business perspective if you have RUM data. Make sure you get buy-in from different stakeholders as much as possible, because it's going to make your job a lot easier. Focus on just the pages that matter most. Revisit your budgets regularly. And then kind of the last two are really, really important. Remember that the metrics are always evolving. So 2 years from now, I could be on this stage telling you, oh, hey, look at these metrics. And probably, some of the people in this room will be on various stages telling various audiences about new metrics that have come along. And that doesn't mean that the current metrics have failed. It's all just a journey. We're all learning about how to measure things better as we proceed. But new metrics will come along. And one of the things that actually keeps this job interesting for me is the fact that things are always evolving and improving. And that's very exciting. And then just never stop measuring. Don't look away from your dashboard. I mean, you sleep, eat, do the things you need to do, but never stop measuring. So thank you. Thank you very much. Right. And then I'm a nerd, so here's my footnotes.
We got a few minutes.
All right.
Very nicely done.
Thank you.
I had actually it was on the last one there when you were talking about the metrics and how the metrics will change, which is totally true.
Except for Start Render.
Yes, Start Render. Thank you for giving shout out to Start Render, though. That one, that one has a special place in my heart. I know we talked about that a little bit yesterday. I like that one too. But how do you find, in your conversations with folks at organizations, that they're handling that? Because I know if you look at a huge part, if not one of the primary reasons for Core Web Vitals was to try and bring some sort of stability, to be able to be like, okay, these are the things, and they're going to be semi-stable in terms of like what the metrics are, so that to deal with the whole OMG, BBQ, WTF thing that we've got going on. So like, how do you see folks kind of handling that when it's, you know, maybe not an issue for the performance teams, but when you're talking about all those other stakeholders, like communicating to them like, hey, you know, this is what we were looking at, but now we should be doing this, or, you know, how do you have any tips on communicating that or helping with that?
Yeah, it's a really, like, I mean, all of the tool, like the monitoring tool vendors, we owe just a huge debt of gratitude to Google for coming out with Core Web Vitals, because it really did, it gave so many non-technical people kind of something to rally around. It's like, okay, great, 3 metrics. They measure 3 things that users care about. This is great. People could finally wrap their heads around things. And so, you know, personally, like, I've spoken to more non-technical people in the last 2 years than I have in like previous 10 years. And that's wonderful. Then the caveat, though, is that the metrics are still like a bit complex, and it can be hard, I think, for people who are coming to this brand new, and they just want things to work like magically 100% of the time out of the box, and they don't necessarily understand that if their metric changed, is it to do with the fact that like we measured something wrong, that something on the page is broken, or that the metric is broken. And so, you know, we have to do a lot of kind of like walking alongside people and kind of just helping them vet kind of those questions. And so that kind of hasn't gone away. I don't know if that directly answered your question.
No, but it's very relevant, though. I feel like, especially like, yeah, on that side of things, like working with organizations with different tools, that variability that you're talking about, like where something goes wrong and you're not quite sure why, that's like a quick way for folks to lose trust in metrics and tools, which is, I think, one of the biggest challenges we've probably got for addressing on these sorts of things.
And that's the other thing. It's kind of like you want people to trust tools, you want people to trust metrics. So it's really hard to say, trust this, but it's probably going to change. Like, it's a very mixed message. And it's not enough to say we're doing our best. Which is why, yeah, I think like kind of, you know, sanity checking your metrics and having visuals to show people are really, really helpful. But yeah, I don't think we've hit kind of a set it and forget it sort of mode yet with any of this.
Yeah, not sure that we ever actually will, to your point there. Yeah, once we get something cracked, we'll figure out something else. Yeah, okay, and then one last question that somebody had with all the talk about INP. Is that in SpeedCurve realm yet, or?
Not yet, but I think like everybody, we're talking about it. It's around the corner.
Cool, all right,
Yeah.
awesome.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Tammy.